Hi everyone. Now we'll be continuing with the chapter, The Cold War Era, Chapter 1 of NCRT Book 1, Contemporary World Politics. So, starting with the topic, first of all, the most important question that could come as one marker is what was the landmark in the contemporary world politics? Landmark in the contemporary world politics, and the answer is the end of the Second World War was the landmark in contemporary world politics. Talking about the Second World War, it started in 1939 and ended in 1945. There were two alliances in this war. Firstly, the Allied forces, in which we had USSR, Britain, and France, which were fighting against the Axis powers, Japan, Germany, and Italy. And the another important question that could come as a one or two marker is how did World War II cause destruction? And the answer here is firstly loss of human lives, and secondly is destruction of civilian property. Destruction of property. So this is a very important question that could come. Now talking about the end of the Second World War, here we see that the US had dropped two atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were also called as Fat Man and Little Boy, as mentioned in a box on page number 4. It also mentions that the little boy was had a yield of 15 kilotons, and the Fat Man had a yield of 21 kilotons. So after there were few critics and supporters regarding this bombing of Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the US. The critics of this act uh, supported the fact that it was unnecessary on the part of the USA to drop these bombs, as the Soviet Union, as Japan was already about to surrender. So this is their first point, that Japan was already about to surrender. Secondly, what they believed is that the US did this because it wanted to prove that it was supreme, that it was more supreme than the USSR. Thirdly, it did not want the USSR, not want it to have political gains in Asia. So these are the three reasons why the critics did not support the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, whereas there were also supporters saying that this bombing was necessary to end war quickly. So this is their first reason, to end war quickly, and the second reason is to stop further loss of lives and property. So this is how we summarize the fact that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings by the US were supported as well as were contrasted by the critics and supporters. There were three reasons. The critics felt it was unnecessary because Japan was already about to surrender. Secondly, they thought that US wanted to prove itself as supreme, and thirdly, they did not want USSR to have political gains in Asia. Secondly, the supporters felt like the ending, the bombing of Japan was necessary to end the war quickly, and secondly, to stop further loss. Now, moving on to the next page, which mentions about the logic of deterrence, which could also be asked as a sixth marker. Well, while discussing this topic, I like to make it easier for you by imagining a person who goes and buys bombs, atom bombs, but finds it too costly and but buys it anyway. And then because the person buys these bombs, and the bombs are in the person's possession, it causes death and destruction. Ultimately, the person feels like he had no political gains out of it. So, now talking about the actual points, is that the Cold War was rooted in the understanding. The Cold War was rooted in the understanding that destruction caused by the use of atom bombs, destruction caused by the use of atom bombs is too costly for any country to bear. When two rival powers, we have here two rival powers that are in possession of nuclear weapons, and secondly are capable and of inflicting death and destruction, then a full-fledged war is unlikely. No side would want to risk war since no political gains would justify the destruction of their societies. Now, these are 3 points that you can cover while writing your answer. This is the first point, that atom bombs are too costly for any country to bear. Secondly, the two rival powers are in possession of these bombs and could also cause immense death and destruction. And thirdly, this war would not lead to any political gains and could not justify the destruction of the societies. These are the 3 points. Coming to the fourth point is the what if scenario. Just in case we have a war, then it would be impossible to declare any side as the winner. Side as a winner. The fifth point being, even if, so this is the if scenario, even if one country tries to disable the nuclear weapons of another country, the another country would still be left with enough weapons to inflict an acceptable destruction. So these are the 5 points. Now covering the sixth point is the main meaning of logic of deterrence, which states that logic of deterrence means both sides have the capacity to retaliate against an attack and to cause so much destruction that neither can afford to initiate a war. So firstly, they have the power to retaliate, plus to cause so much destruction that neither can afford to initiate war. Cause destruction that neither can afford to initiate war. Well, talking about all the logic of deterrence and its 6 points for a 6 marker, we can also have another question saying, note the military features of Cold War. Here there are only 2 military features. Firstly, to understand that the superpowers had to behave rationally and responsibly. By rationally, one means that rationally and responsibly. By rationally, one means that the powers have to understand the risk involved in fighting wars, and by responsibility, another understands that restraining is important. Restraining and avoiding becomes immensely significant. Well, coming to another topic, the emergence of two power blocks. We have another important question saying why were the smaller states interested in being a part of the bigger alliances or being a part of the superpowers? Is because firstly, the smaller states wanted protection, they wanted weapons, and thirdly, they wanted economic aid, economic aid against their local rivals. So these are the reasons why smaller states wanted to be a part of the superpower alliances. Now, coming to the examples of superpower alliances, we have first of all NATO, which formed in April 1949. It had 12 states. So, first point being April 1949, second being 12 states, and thirdly, the reason, the purpose why the NATO was formed is because it declared that an armed attack on any purpose was that any armed attack on any one of them would mean that an attack on all. Secondly, we had the Warsaw Pact as an example. The Warsaw Pact here was formed as also, it's also called the Eastern Alliance, and it was led by led by USSR. This was led by USA. So this was led by USSR. Secondly, it was created in 1955, and the purpose for which it was made is because it wanted to counter the NATO forces. So Warsaw Pact was initially made to counter the forces of the NATO. Now, we also will notice that Europe became a huge scene of military alliances because there were a lot of intervention in East Europe as well as in the Western Europe. The Eastern Europe was mainly a part of Soviet Union, and the Western Europe was mainly a part of US. We have another treaties and organizations like SEATO, which was the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. And fourth, the CENTO, which is the Central Treaty Organization. In the further topic, we also see another important question, important one marker question, is that with whom did the USSR quarrel and had a fight over a territorial dispute in 1969, and it was with the communist China. Now another important question that we could have as 2 marker or maybe a 6 marker as well is that why did the superpowers need smaller states? Here the points are very, very clear. Firstly, we have we need them for the vital resources like oil and minerals. Secondly, they're needed for territory. Thirdly, they're needed for locations. For territory being to launch weapons and troops, for locations being to spy. So here locations are for spy, territory are for launching troops. So T and T would become easier, locations for spying each other and economic support to take up military expenses. Now talking about arenas of the Cold War. First of all, the most important part here is to learn the definition of arenas of the Cold War. So by arenas of the Cold War, we refer to areas where crises occurred or threatened to occur but did not cross certain limits. certain limits. So this is a very important one marker saying define what do you mean by arenas of the Cold War. Now some examples of arenas of the Cold War are you can remember as Korea, Berlin, Congo being KBC, along with Vietnam and Afghanistan. Then we have another important question, which is also an NCRT question, is that how did the two powers practice arms control as well as arms race? So arms race and arms control. This is also an NCRT question. So arms race was because logic of deterrence did not eliminate rivalries, even though it led to softening of the Cold War, but it did not eliminate rivalries. That is why it led to suspicions between, since they were suspicious of each other, they armed themselves to the teeth, armed to teeth, and did possess a lot of nuclear ammunitions and arms, but also they understood the need for arms control, because there could be serious repercussions if there was a proper war. It could be fired by someone by mistake. A nuclear weapon could be mischievously short of a weapon, or maybe it could an accident could have occurred. So that is why they decided on a few treaties that could be arms control treaties, examples of which are the LTBT, the Limited Test Ban Treaty. Secondly, they had NPT. And thirdly, they had Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. So these are the two ways that they practiced armed race as well as arms control. And these are the three examples: Limited Test Ban Treaty, NPT, and Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. The information regarding these treaties are given on page number 14, which could also be asked as one marker. So please be thorough through it. I hope these topics are clear to you. I'll be covering the rest of the chapter in the next video. Thank you so much.